Okay, the title of this workshop is on the subject of reception, and you're probably wondering where the word mutual is located in the title, and the answer is it isn't, because reception is the larger category of which mutual reception is one type. So this is a discussion of reception in general, and this is going to be a lecture almost entirely driven from the medieval perspective, which I know there have been some other people talking about it. Reception is something we find in medieval astrology texts, particularly the most powerful and massive tomes written in the Middle Ages, the Liber Astronomiae of Guido Bonatti, written somewhere around 1250 AD. Bonatti was a very unusual astrologer, not merely that he was good, but he cites his sources. He will go down, he will discuss a technique. He'll say, Halley says, and then he'll state Halley's opinion. Mesahala says, and then he'll state his opinion. Omar says, and he goes on like this for a couple of pages. But I say. So he wasn't just parroting. Arabic astrology. He personally tested it and synthesized it. And while there are a couple of places in the book where the synthesis is he didn't get the point quite right, by and large, he did an extraordinarily good job of mastering and integrating the Arabic tradition and making it available to the West. It's not quite accurate to say that he was the author of the main Western textbook, because by his time, the West had Latin translations of most of the Arabic textbooks. They had Latin translations of Ptolemy. They did not, however, have Latin translations of any other Greek, because for some reason they didn't come through. Well, they certainly knew, but they knew about them indirectly, mainly Dorotheus and Valens. They knew about indirectly. Correction on Valens. They had some actual text from Valens, but they didn't know it was Valens, because it was written in a book called the Liber Hermetis. They also had a lot of Abu Mashar labeled as being written by Hermes. So they did have some Greek material independently of being transmitted through the Arabs, but not much. Nevertheless, this is a technique which is implicit in Greek astrology, maybe even explicit, but is honed to a fairly well by Bonatti and the other medievals. Okay. Now.
Also, Rob, just use that wheel in the middle.
Okay, that makes it go.
Up and down.
Okay, how do you make the thing change slides?
Left button. With your mouse.
There we go. Right button? Okay, or the left button. All right. Reception, a definition. Reception exists whenever a planet makes an aspect to one of its rulers, especially ruler by domicile, also known as sign ruler, and exaltation. And for the purposes of this afternoon's workshop, and any other workshop you attend that I do, this does not include Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto as rulers. In my opinion, they do not rule signs. The medieval system of rulerships is so intricate and so fine that to introduce the three modern planets destroys it completely without adding anything particularly useful. To give you a little bit of a background on my experience with rulerships, the first astrology I learned how to do, for those of you who know about one of the weirder branches of 20th century astrology, was the system of cosmobiology of the Ebertin school in Germany, which did not use rulerships at all for anything. I also didn't use houses. They used midpoint combination on a 90-degree dial, and the entire work was done with that. I was strongly influenced by that. When I first became a professional, the word I have to use is I was brainwashed into using the modern rulerships for houses. And after about a year of using them in my consultations with live clients, I discovered that about 90% of my errors came from making predictions based on sign rulers. I therefore dropped sign rulers again. Then in the early 90s, so I didn't use sign rulers for a long time, Lee Lehman introduced me to the medieval system, which you'll get a little bit of today. And in the medieval system, there are two major differences from the modern system. One is Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are not used as rulers at all because they weren't there in medieval mind, and modern followers of the system still do not use them as rulers. We use them as occupants, but not as rulers. And the second difference is that there are 5 modes of rulership which all have to be taken into consideration before you decide what rules a particular planet or house. 4 of those modes are directly from the Hellenistic period. The 5th one is a peculiar one to the Middle Ages. However, there is a 5th mode of rulership in Ptolemy, which I will introduce to you in a moment, and it explains a good deal about where this whole thing came from. So, reception exists whenever a planet makes an aspect to one of its rulers, especially domicile or exaltation. Now, just to answer the question, where does mutual reception come in? The answer is mutual reception exists when each of the planet aspects the others and they're each other's ruler. But I don't know if you were listening carefully, even though I speak rather quickly, you may have noticed the word aspect was in there.
That's what I'm wondering.
Because in the true medieval mutual reception methodology, the aspect is required. So you cannot have a mutual reception between Jupiter and Capricorn and Saturn and Sagittarius. You can have something. Actually, that was a particularly bad example, but I'll live with it for a moment. You have, if 2 planets exchange signs by exaltation or domicile without being an aspect, they are said to be in each other's generosity. And that is a lesser reception because there is no aspect. And generosities and mutual receptions and receptions in general rely primarily on domicile and exaltation rulership, with one interesting addition. This will make more sense in a moment, but I'll say it now. The 3 minor modes of rulership are triplicity, bound, term, limit, or confined, depending on your school. Those are all the same thing. And face, which is the 10-degree decade system of the medievals, which is different from the modern. If any 2 of those operate simultaneously, you have reception. You can have reception by term and face, term and triplicity, triplicity and term, triplicity and face, but they will not operate if you have only one of them. For today, to keep it simple, we will concentrate entirely on reception by domicile and exaltation. And because those are the only ones that usually come up at all frequently, the reception by minor dignity is extremely rare. So, a real mutual reception, a powerful, perfect mutual reception, requires the exchange of rulerships and an aspect. So, a classic example would be the Sun in Aries trining Mars in Leo. That is a perfect mutual reception of the strongest kind, particularly because the Sun in Aries is also exalted. So it becomes really potent. What does reception do? In the broadest sense, it ensures that what you are looking for out of the aspect will, looking for out of the house will occur. If you don't have some form of reception, it will not, or not easily. Okay. Nick Best inspired me. I put in some transitions. Unfortunately, the sexiest one he had where it sort of bubbles and dissolves. They don't have that one.
Macintosh.
Okay. This is my favorite example of a chart that has perceptions. Because this is the chart of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who, I won't say exactly he started out at the bottom because the Roosevelts were a very wealthy and powerful family in the state of New York, both branches. You know, the Republican branch was Theodore and the Democratic branch was FDR. But at the age of, somewhere in his 30s, he of course was afflicted with polio and was never able to walk again without assistance, which typically would do in most people as far in terms of having a political career, let alone becoming arguably one of the, if not the greatest president in American history. The only serious contender for that role is Abraham Lincoln. I would be hard-pressed to decide which was which. But his chart, this, by the way, we are doing whole sign houses here, which I'm sure by now you're getting used to. The only difference between my approach and some others is I really ignore the intermediate cusps. However, I am getting increasingly intrigued. I have proposed the idea in my own writings, but I'm getting increasingly intrigued with actually using the equal house positions as cusps, indicating power points, but I haven't started systematically doing it yet. I'm 64 years old and I'm practicing astrology for 47 years, and I'm still learning. Note well. And I'm learning from younger colleagues. Note well. By the way, now that I have a moment to say this, one of the things I've gotten from this conference is that the future of astrology is in excellent hands. It's also apparent that I've existed. I see my evidence floating. I see my influence floating around, but fine, I have no problem with that. Obviously, very flattering. Okay, so this is my current way of doing charts. It's a solar fire chart. It's actually, if you look over on the left, you'll see Koch, but I don't pay any attention to that. I just did this. I simply turned the intermediate house colors to white. And you'll notice I don't have any display of their values. Although in the form I actually use with my clients, I do. Okay. One of the things that most of you probably don't know about the history of 20th century astrology is that prior to the advent of hippies doing astrology, which is to say prior to the late 60s and 70s, astrologers were so far to the right politically you would not believe it. There's been a change. Most astrologers regarded Franklin Delano Roosevelt as a dangerous radical. And they looked at this Uranus conjunct the Sun and said, see, he's a dangerous radical. I obviously overblown. He actually was a pretty classy example of a Uranian. He did whatever was necessary to keep things alive, even if it wasn't consistent with a social class. In his social class in America at the time, he was widely referred to as a traitor to his class because he was interested in protecting the common man and woman. Let's hear it for traitors for that class. We haven't seen any lately. Okay. Now, what do we have going on here? All right. Let's start with his midheaven, 22 Gemini 10, which has Mars on it, which is, by the way, retrograde. You'll notice also. So this is another one of those retrograde Marses. And the opinion I have of retrogrades is one I've heard noise about in the room. And while this opinion agrees with mine, I can't say that I'm responsible for its being held because I never uttered this opinion in public. But I see a lot of us agree to the same conclusion. The planet works weirdly. Not badly, weirdly. Outside of the box is the expression I use with my clients. So we have Mars on the midheaven, and before you wonder what FDR did that was Mars, I'd like to remind you of World War II. Little incident there. The last just war, if you will. And if you won't, that's okay too. Now I want to call your attention to the position of Mercury. See Mercury down, we have a little pointer here. Mercury, 2712 Aquarius, to Mars at 27 Gemini 0. This is a perfect one-way reception. Mercury is happily located in an air sign, and I will tell you this now, but remember it when you'll see a thing that shows you later. Mercury rules all air signs in nocturnal charts. This is a system of rulership which is not medieval. It's from Dorotheus of Sidon. It's also found in Vedic Vale, which is thoroughly Hellenistic. So Mercury is in a partile trine with Mars, receiving Mars from the 6th house of service and health and illness. Actually, illness and service is probably the best delineation. So Mars is not only on the midheaven, it is received by a dignified ruler. When a planet is received by a dignified ruler, it gains some of that dignity for itself. The most extreme example of this is that when a debilitated planet is received by a dignified ruler, the debility is canceled. The planet operates as if it were dignified. Although, now speaking in terms of my own more psychological approach to astrology, when my psych mode hat is on, I would have to say that this newly acquired dignity works only when the person's being conscious and intentional. When they fall into robot mode, they go back to acting like the planet was debilitated. But it is very easy to make a planet in debility, overcome that debility completely and turn it into the corresponding dignity if the planet is aspected by its ruler, which is dignified. It's actually a term for this in Abu Mashar. It's called pushing dignity. Abu Mashar's lesser or greater introduction, circa 800 AD. I want to make one thing clear. Abu Mashar has much to answer for, but this isn't one of the parts that he has to answer for. Abu Mashar, by the way, appears to be the guy who terminated the use of whole-side houses. His authority was so great that nobody used them afterwards.
What era?
What?
When?
About 800 AD.
Wow.
Up to that time, even the Arabic authors were using them. Or some weird hybrid. Okay, so planet number 1, Mars occupying the 10th house, is perfectly aspected by a moderately dignified Lord partile. I want to pause briefly and define the word partile. It's usually considered to mean exact, but it actually means in the same degree. And arguably this might not be partile, but unless Mars is 27.0 plus, but I'm not going to quibble over that. Partile means according to the degree, and its exact translation of the Greek moirakos, which means according to the degree. But this is, to all intents and purposes, a partile trine because they are in the same degrees of their respective signs. Okay, so we have a reception. Now let's go to the moon. The moon in this chart is in Cancer. It is humongously dignified. Not only is it dignified by being in its own sign and in a triplicity in which it has dignity, it is also a nocturnal chart, which makes the moon more potent. And let's see what the moon is doing. Well, the moon in Cancer is in a partile sextile with Saturn and Taurus. Now this is significant because the moon is not only the exaltation lord of Taurus, it is also the triplicity lord of all earth signs at night. So the moon is receiving Saturn by 2 dignities in a partile sextile. This means that while Saturn is fairly seriously out of sect, it's in a nocturnal chart and a nocturnal sign at night. That is, it's about as far out of sect as it can get. Nevertheless, the moon confers power upon this Saturn that it would not have normally had. Okay, let's go down here to Venus, and we see Venus is also at 603, 2 minutes out of an exact square with Saturn, and this is a perfect mutual reception with only 2 minutes of error. Saturn is in the domicile of Venus, and Venus is in the domicile of Saturn. Now, you may say, but it's a square. Well, yes, it is a square, and that's not entirely unobservable in his life. His marriage to Eleanor ended in all but name in 1919 when Eleanor discovered his affair with Eleanor's secretary, Lucy Mercer. And while they continued being married for the sake of his political career, and I think they were genuinely friends, the sexual aspect of the marriage was over. He proceeded to have 2 or 3 lovers and the rest of but he had lovers even while he was in the White House, but the newspapers didn't at that time try to dig out that kind of garbage, and the Republicans knew better not to try because he could have done them in even worse. There was a little matter you may not be aware of Harding having a mistress giving birth to a child of his while he was president. That didn't get into the newspapers either. The newspapers were much more polite in those days. But that's clearly a manifestation of the Venus-Saturn. But at the same time, the Venus-Saturn didn't work all negatively because of this double mutual reception. This mutual reception. There is, by the way, another possible kind of reception which has been observed and found to be fairly important. Let's say planet A aspects its domicile ruler, and A is the exaltation ruler of planet B. That is, B is the exaltation ruler of A is the domicile ruler of B. That's called, by modern neo-traditionalists, a mixed reception. It's not a term I'm too crazy about because it has a strange meaning in ordinary daily English. But what it is it's a two-way single reception. It's very powerful. Not quite as powerful as the straight neutral reception, but it's very powerful indeed. So, Saturn is actually received by both of its major rulers. It's received by exaltation through the moon, and it's received by domicile through Venus. This means that Saturn has some real oomph. Now, this raises a fascinating question. When do you not want a planet to be dignified? And the answer is when it's a malefic in the 12th house or ruling the 12th house, or something comparable. This, however, in whole sign system is the 9th house Saturn, so its potential for doing good isn't too bad. All right, so we've got Venus, we've got Saturn, Moon, Mars, Mercury. Now let's go to the Sun. The Sun is debilitated in Aquarius. It's in detriment. The Sun is it's not closely, but it's squared by Saturn also. Now, this is a weaker reception. Saturn is receiving the Sun by domicile. Can you see that? But what makes it weaker is the fact that the Sun is already separated from the square. Applications or partile aspects make receptions much more potent. But it's still a reception. So let's see. Oh yes, Jupiter. What can we get out of Jupiter? Jupiter is in Taurus. Its domicile. Oh yes, right. This is not a very close reception, but it's still real. The Moon is in the exaltation of Jupiter, and Jupiter is in the exaltation of the Moon. So there's a not quite perfect mutual reception because they're not very close in aspect, but it is nevertheless still a mutual reception by exaltation. Now, if you've been watching carefully, all 7 classical planets are involved in receptions in this chart. It is a single most spectacular feature of this chart. I saw a hand down here. Yes?
I think you've answered it, but I just want to make it clear in my mind.
A bit louder, please. Is it you?
I wanted to be clear on when you're talking about aspect, you're not using whole sign plate aspects, right? For the sake of the definition.
Yes, actually, the question is if the aspect is a whole sign aspect, is that sufficient? The answer is sufficient, yes, but not as strong. Basically, the hierarchy of strength is exact the strongest within the so-called moiety of the orbs. Applying is next strongest within so-called moiety of orbs. Separating is weaker, and by sign only is weakest. The moiety of the orbs in medieval astrology are done by planet, not by aspect. And that's a whole other can of worms. I refer to several books on the subject. Yes?
In terms of actual angular relationships, what aspects are we considering?
Only the majors.
Only the majors.
All the majors and conjunctions. Oh yeah. Did you hear what I said? Only the majors and conjunctions? Well, don't you think conjunction is an aspect?
Yep.
Technically it isn't. Because things that are right next to each other don't look at each other. They're together. The correct term, the relation is actually reversed from what you think. Aspects are varieties of conjunction, not the other way around. You have 2 kinds of conjunction. You have conjunction by body, that's what we call conjunctions. And you have conjunction by aspect, which is what we call aspects. So you're right in thinking that conjunctions and aspects are in the same category, but it's the wrong category. It's not that the conjunction is an aspect, the aspect is a conjunction. The word conjunction means a joining together, or synaphe, or synodos actually in Greek. Synaphe is applying, synodos is a joining together. So don't worry about that. From my point of view, that's equivalent vocabulary. If you understand them as being in the same general category of joining, you're fine. That'll do. But you will hear people get into a Virgo mode, and sorry, Virgos, and say, well, conjunction isn't really an aspect at all. And I would say, yes, the aspect is a conjunction. Okay. So that's the hierarchy. Within orb applying, exact within orb applying, within orb separating, and by sign only. To really not be received, there must not be an aspect by sign at all. The state of totally unreceived requires that there is not even an aspect by sign. But those are weak receptions. Okay, I'm not going to bother delineating the chart, but well, Roosevelt does have a number of close aspects. What is really remarkable about this chart is that all of the 7 classical planets are either receiving or received. No, all of the 7 classical planets are received. Sorry. As well as some of them receiving. So, what is important about this? It ties everything together. The chart is running as a very well-integrated unit. It's not necessarily an easy life or totally flawless one, but everything is working together. Okay, that will do that for a moment. This I like to refer to as the dreaded table of essential dignities. The good news is you don't memorize it, you carry it. This particular version contains 2 different sets of triplicity rulers, and I need to explain this briefly. Down here we have the signs of the zodiac. Then we have the planetary rulers, and for our purposes today, ignore the D and the D's and the N's, although that refers to the diurnal nocturnal nature of the sign. Then we have the exaltations of the planets, and for today's purposes, ignore the degrees, although they are generally believed to be significant. Then we have the triplicity rulers. This is the first dignity that those of you who have studied only modern astrology will not be aware of. Triplicity rulers are, you have one ruler, they go by elements. Fire has a set of triplicity rulers, earth has a set, air has a set, water has a set. And there are 2 different versions of this system. One that comes from Dorotheus, Valence, and others, and another one that comes from Ptolemy. They're closely related, and I've come to a very ugly conclusion. They both work. I don't like that. I mean, I hear the noble efforts to create a synthesis of Vedic and Western astrology, but and I'm not going to say that it's incorrect or improper to do so. But I would like to make one suggestion. They can't be precisely mixable. There's got to be a time when we use one or the other, and we should have a criteria in advance. Because if you simply mix them together without such a principle, you're increasing the likelihood that the results you're getting are purely random. I'm speaking statistically here. But if we can find a reason or a method by which we know when to use which for what purposes, we're solid. That will work, okay? I have such a method here. The method is when I am doing the dignity and rulership, I use the Ptolemy system. When I'm doing what different things triplicity rulers rule and when they take effect, I use the Dorothean. Because triplicity rulers have classically been used for 2 completely unrelated purposes. Dignity and rulership is the one you're going to be more familiar with. The Sun has dignity in Leo has dignity in Aries in the daytime, and it rules all fire signs in the daytime chart. Jupiter has dignity at night and rules all fire signs at night. Now, the Ptolemaic system does not use the 3rd column at all. So you'll notice the 3rd column is slightly attached. No, it is not italicized. The Ptolemy system does not use the 3rd column at all. And you see the Mars in parentheses here at water. Ptolemy uses Mars for water 24 hours a day with some assistance from Venus and Jupiter, which is unfortunately impossible to apply rigorously. But Dorotheus uses Venus for the diurnal ruler of earth signs, water signs. I have one rather thrilling example which suggests that the Ptolemaic system does work better for rulership and dignity. O.J. Simpson, if you use, in one of the best methods for computing the overall ruler of a chart, which comes from Ibn Ezra, and 12th century Jewish astrologer who lived wherever he needed to. He started out in Spain and wound up in Palestine. Okay. His method, which seems to be the only one I have seen in this general agreement about this in medieval circles, it's the only one that seems to actually give a plausible answer to the question, what planet, if any, dominates the chart as a whole? Okay. If I told you that one method gave Venus as O.J. Simpson's all-mutant or dominant planet, and another one gave Mars, which one would you go with? Yeah. Dorotheus gives Venus, Ptolemy gives Mars. And you can see the Venus comes in second, and which makes sense because he's a good-looking guy and so on and so forth. But forgetting about what happened to his wife for a moment, just an athlete in general, you expect Mars. So we don't even have to make any assumptions about who did what to whom. Yes?
Dorotheus is the Egyptian.
These are the Ptolemaic, but what, these here?
Ptolemy is the Chaldean. Is Egyptian or Chaldean?
Well, we haven't got, those are the bounds. I haven't gotten to those yet. These are the triplicities. Now, the other use for triplicities is that I can't remember the person's real Arabic name, but it's referred to as Alesdegaz or Alensdesgad in corrupt Arabic in the Latin text, assigns different rulerships to the houses based on their triplicity lords. For example, the fourth house, the first triplicity lord of the fourth house rules the father, the second house rules land, and the third ruler rules buried treasure. Also, in the Dorothean system, the first triplicity lord rules the first portion of life, the second triplicity lord rules the second portion of life, and the third triplicity lord rules the third portion of life. And that seems to work, broadly speaking. And if I hear you asking how long is the third, see Delphic Oracle. Because the calculation is a bit complicated. The simple answer is a Saturn cycle, but the alternative answer is a bit more complicated. Now, what do I mean by first triplicity lord, second triplicity lord? If you're born in the daytime, that is, the sun is above the horizon, the first triplicity lord rules the first part of life and is dominant. If you're born, that is to say, the first one listed. So the sun is the first triplicity lord by day, and Jupiter is the first triplicity lord by night. At night, the second one follows, and the third one is always last. Good news is we don't need to do much with triplicity lords. I just want to explain where that Mercury was coming from. Okay, I'm not going to do anything with the bounds, terms, confines, or limits today. They're all the same thing. Except to say that there are two major types that were in use. The dominant one in the Greek period was the Egyptian. The Ptolemaic one assumed more prominence in the Middle Ages and modern period. But unfortunately, the Ptolemaic one has, according to a paper that was given in London a few weeks ago, approximately 8 different variations. And the person giving the paper is trying to figure out from the descriptions in Ptolemy and from the Porphyry commentary which one is correct. And the answer seems to be none of them. This is the Lilly variant, which is the one that's in most common use among modern neo-traditionalists. I would not care to die defending any set of terms, but I will say that Kurt, are you here? Kurt Van Leeuwen here? Well, the Delphic Oracle will go a long way to helping us figure out which one is correct. But without that, we haven't got a prayer. And these are the rulers of the decanates in the medieval system. They are also the rulers of the decanates in the Hellenistic system, but the Hellenistic astrologers did not consider these a fifth dignity. See these numbers down here, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That's the score you give either a rulership or dignity. So, the Mars gets 5 points of dignity when it is in Aries, and 5 points of rulership when it isn't. It gets 5 points of rulership when it is, too, actually. The Sun gets 4 points of rulership as the exaltation ruler, and if it's a daytime chart, the Sun gets an additional 3. This is, again, the medieval system. The Greeks would not have applied the weights, the medievals did. There have been objections raised to this practice. Here's the good news. It doesn't seem to make a hell of a lot of difference whether you use the weights or not. The results most of the time come out the same. That is to say, you treat all dignities and rulership levels as being equal. But let's just say for a moment that you have a daytime chart with Aries rising. Okay? The sign ruler of your ascendant is Mars. No surprise, I hope. The exaltation ruler is the Sun. So is the triplicity ruler. If you use the Greek system, that gives the Sun 2 sets of beans to Mars as 1, If you use the medieval system, it gives the sun 7 beings to Mars' 5. Either way, the sun rules Aries in the daytime. This is one of the differences between the medieval and modern system of rulerships. The rulerships are often not what you expect. This system works. The modern one doesn't, in my humble opinion. I would put that on to say, I always say that after an arrogant statement. But I really don't get good results out of the modern rulers. I will say that emphatically. If you do, astrology is weird, and it happens. We have a lot of disagreements. I've heard a lot of disagreements in this conference, respectfully stated. The good news is they were respectfully stated. But my experience has been that the modern rulership system does not work. I do not, for example, see Uranus and Neptune currently in mutual reception because they don't rule signs. I do see
Why
that.
don't they rule signs?
What?
Why don't they rule Aquarius and Pisces?
Why don't they rule signs? Here's my theoretical answer. The practical one is they don't seem to, but the theoretical answer is that the signs of the zodiac and the system of rulerships, this is a Rudgarian answer, appear to operate on the basis of ordinary consciousness, that is, normal, non-expanded consciousness. Rudgar was one of the first to point out that Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto were kind of ambassadors to the galaxy and represented supernormal states of consciousness. It's not so much that they don't have anything to do with the signs as they transcend them. That's my belief. And that's as far as I can give you an answer to the question.
So you don't think that Uranus is most comfortable on Aquarius as opposed
No, I don't. I think modern astrologers got Aquarius fundamentally wrong. Scorpio also. Aquarius is not a radical sign. It's a sign that tries to create new order. But the emphasis is on order. When George Bush coined the famous phrase, New World Order, the Aquarians who believe that Uranus rules Aquarius heard the new. I heard order. Aquarius is a very stubborn sign. It's fixed. Aquarians like things to be reasonably neat. They do, in fact, espouse new opinions. But Uranus is not. Aquarians are very interested in social consciousness. Uranus isn't. Uranus is crazy. It's highly individualistic. It breaks rules right and left. Aquarians do not break rules until they don't break rules. They change them. There's a big difference. They respect rules, but they've got to be the right ones. Uranians could give a damn.
So you don't think that Aquarius has the people who are Saturnian rule, what you're talking about, and Aquarius are the Uranus rule that are more innovative and...
Well, they might, but I'd like to see the rest of their chart before I answer that question. We just had one, actually. Roosevelt, with the Aquarius sun, but he had Uranus on the ascendant. So that definitely put him over into the Iranian, somewhat into the Iranian camp. But let me move on, because this is entirely germane to the talk. Okay. The point I'm making here is that sometimes in the medieval system, rulers come up that you wouldn't have expected. So we'll leave it at that. Okay. Here is a possible source of the doctrine of reception, and this is Ptolemy. Most of the time, Ptolemy talks about dignities, but here is one passage where he talks about rulership in connection with a little beastie called the Anamodar, and if you don't know what that is, it doesn't matter. I don't want to get into that. It's a rectification device, which I think is of dubious value. But the Anamodar requires finding the ruler of a certain degree, namely the degree of the prenatal new or full moon. After this, it must be observed what planets have dominion over the said degree, and their dominion depends always on the 5 following prerogatives, that is to say, modes of rulership, namely on triplicity, which I've explained, house, exaltation, terms, and phase or configuration. Now, the Greek of this is really murky. It's not really clear how phase can be a mode of rulership, but configuration strongly suggests that a planet has rulership over every degree that it aspects. So when a planet aspects its ruler, or more precisely, a ruler aspects a planet that it rules, it's got 2 modes of rulership immediately. It has the rulership by sign, and it has rulership over every degree that it aspects. So aspects actually turn out to be a mode of rulership. And reception exists because there are 2 modes immediately. Now, in the case of the generosity I mentioned before, where the planets exchange signs, but don't make an aspect, the rulership by aspect is missing. Only the reception by dignity is left. That's why it's a lesser reception. Okay, that's Ptolemy Book 3. And I checked the Schmidt translation, and he's a little more questionable about this necessarily being aspect, but it says basically the same thing. This is the Ashmont translation. Okay, now we get into my own theoretical construct as to what is going on here. It turns out that on varying levels, the philosopher Aristotle was extraordinarily influential in the theory of late classical and really powerfully influential in medieval astrology. And we're now going to get rather metaphysical here, strange as it may seem. I'm talking about a practical technique, but the more I study this stuff, the more I discover that practical techniques have their origins in extremely profound metaphysical principles. Okay. These are called Aristotle's four causes. And the word cause does not mean what you think it means, because only one type of cause is now accepted, namely, number 2, the efficient cause. Okay? The Greek word for cause is aiteia, and it means that which can be held responsible for something. And when Aristotle asked the question, what are the aitei of things, what he was asking was, what is it that we have to know about things to understand them completely? Okay? These are the answers. Whenever you're confronted with something, you have to know what it's made out of. There is a big difference between, for example, a tumbler made out of glass and a tumbler made out of plastic. One will break easily, the other one won't. Material cause. What made it come into existence? That's the one we still accept. When we say cause, we mean this one. Now, the Aristotelian efficient cause isn't precisely identical with the modern one, but it's close enough so we don't need to quibble about the difference. Suffice to say, when philosophers of science in the early modern period were throwing out the other causes, they consciously retained the efficient cause and called it that, but they changed it. The efficient cause is that which makes something come into existence. Also called the motive cause. It's the cause of change. Formal cause. That's what something is. Its essence. Its essential nature. This has been thrown out of modern science. Material cause obviously hasn't been. And last and most disreputable of all is the final cause. What is it for or trying to be? Now, there's a very fundamental fact about Aristotle a lot of people don't know. Actually, there are a lot of things about Aristotle most people don't know, but this one is, let's say you know something about Aristotle, you may not know this. He was a biologist primarily. This is very important because he was talking about the causes in terms of living beings. And in living beings, there are ends that are trying to be attained. The cells of the embryo that are going to become the eye, their final cause is an eye. See? Things have purposes in living beings. Aristotle did not believe in a dead universe. Early modern science had to throw out the final cause because it implies that the universe is a living being. And that, friends, is heresy. And that, friends, is why we are heretics. Because implicitly or explicitly, we treat the universe as if it were a living being. Astrology explicitly treated it as a living being in the ancient world. That's my fanciest transition. Yes. De Anima, Book B, translated by J.A. Smith. Now, the soul is the cause or source of a living body. Not the soul arises out of the body. The soul is the cause of the body. But the soul is the cause of its body alike in all three senses, which we explicitly recognize. It is the source or origin of movement, efficient cause. It is the end to which it is working implicitly, final cause. It is the essence of the whole living body, formal cause. The material cause, of course, is the material out of which the body is made. So the soul is the formal, final, and efficient cause of the body. Now, this next statement sounds terribly modern Californian, but implicit in this statement is each of us, the purpose for which each of us exists is to, as nearly perfectly as possible, manifest who we really are within our bodies. In other words, self-actualization. That would even be a perfectly appropriate Aristotelian term, although he probably would prefer soul actualization. Now, I don't want to go right on here immediately because I have a word which is fraught with ambiguity in modern language. The word is soul. Now, rather than leaving you to fill in the blank with whatever you wish to fill in, I'm going to fill it in for you. The Aristotelian definition of soul is precisely and only this. 1. The soul is that which makes a living body living. By the way, the English word soul comes from a Germanic root which means living. The origin of the Greek word is a little more complicated. So the soul is that which makes a living body living. The second definition of soul is that it is the form which makes any particular living entity that living entity and not some other living entity. So your soul is not something you have. Your soul is who you are. But because Aristotle recognizes that not all forms are fully instantiated in this world, each of us is in varying degrees a successful rendition of who it is we really are. Very few people ever do this 100%. I would call them realized beings in the most literal sense of the word. We all pretty much fail to some degree to succeed at being perfectly manifested souls. But you don't have a soul. You can't sell your soul to the devil because you are your soul, in the Aristotelian sense of the word, which, oddly enough, was pretty much accepted by the medievals. I'm not quite sure what they meant when they talked about selling your soul to the devil. You sell yourself to the devil most assuredly, but you can't be without a soul. You're dead. Or, the way I like to put it is your soul is who is not present at your funeral in the body. The body's there, the soul isn't. Your soul may be hovering around watching the festivities, but it's not in the body. Okay? This is relevant, believe it or not. Okay, and here I repeat. The four factors, the four causes completely describe any entity in the world. In living things, the soul is the final, formal, and efficient cause of the living entity. The soul is that which makes a living thing alive. It is especially the formal cause of every living thing. That is, it makes that living thing what it is and not something or someone else. Only in living things can a formal cause of the soul be an efficient and final cause. In non-material things, the four causes are four separate entities. Only in living beings are three of those causes the same thing, the soul. What does this have to do with the price of tea? Okay, this does not answer the question, so I will answer it. I may have it further down, I've forgotten. The answer is that the ruler of a house or a sign is the soul of the house or a sign. It is the formal, final, and efficient cause of the house, and the occupants of the house are the material cause. The chart acts exactly as if it were a living being, mainly because it is the representation of one. But even the chart of an Aries ingress acts as if it were a living being. This is the sense in which astrology treats everything as being completely alive. And this is not something I'm making up. This is explicitly stated in various places of literature. The point I'm making in this slide, however, is a little different. All things develop through a process. In the beginning is the material cause, that out of which something is made. In the beginning in time. Then the efficient cause begins to transform the thing so that the formal cause becomes manifest as the final cause. Since in living things, these last three are the soul of a thing, the efficient, formal, and final cause is manifest later in time than the material cause. What's that got to do with this? If you have planet X in the first house ruled by planet Y somewhere else, X will be dominant in the first house's affairs in early life, and Y will become dominant later in life. There is a temporal flow from the ruled planets to the ruling planets. Now, of course, every planet is both an occupant and a ruler, except Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. They're kind of outside of this game, as I stated earlier. This means basically that there's a hierarchy of matter and form. What is material at one level is form at another level. And I can illustrate this very simply. This is not a part of this doctrine that medieval philosophy was particularly fond of, but it is found in various schools of Aristotelianism. From the point of view of an atom, protons, neutrons, and electrons are matter. The atom is the form, because they've been arranged into a particular atom. Now, if we have a group of atoms forming a molecule, then the atoms are matter to the molecule, and the molecule is form to the atoms. The molecules come together into some kind of structural entity, piece of wood or whatever. The molecules are matter to the substance, and the substance is form to the molecules. And it goes all the way up until finally you have the soul is the form of the human, and the body is the material. Interesting question comes to at this point. What is it for which our souls are matter? And the answer is nothing. Soul is the highest entity in this world. There's a higher one, but it's not in this world. Soul is the name of the game, in the sense of that which makes a living thing alive and that which is the form of a particular human or other entity.
Can you relate that to the planetary rulership thing again one more time?
Yes. The rulers of houses represent the formal, final, and efficient cause of the house. They are the outcome in time. They come later. The planets in the house are the matter, what the house has to work with, and they come earlier. So, whatever planet you might have in the first house, or for that matter, sign in the first house, because the sign is also an aspect of the material cause. The ruler is, well, here we go. Here it is. The relation of rulers to whatever they rule. A planet and sign within a house is the matter which the house has to use to become manifest. The ruler of the house, or dispositor of the planet, operates like the soul of a living thing. It is the efficient, formal, and final cause of the house, or planet, the ruled planet, and therefore manifests later in time as an end result toward which the house works. If the lord of a house does not make an aspect to the house, the evolution of the affairs of the house is impeded. This means that the ruler of a house must or should aspect by sign the sign of the house, or the sign in the house cusp if you're using a modern system. If it does not, the affairs of that house are impeded. Why? Because the formal, final, and efficient cause of the house is not powerfully connected to the house and cannot assist in bringing the house to fruition. You see the logic of it? More importantly, you see that there is a logic to it. Yeah, that's what's exciting about this. There is a logic to it. It makes sense. There's a fascinating discussion. It's a fascinating discussion in Antonio de Montulmo, who wrote about 1450, and he's discussing the causes of death and the timing of death, a subject which is not too popular in modern astrology, for good reason. We can't do it. And I'm not sure the medievals are very good at it either, but that's immaterial. Well, we can do it sometimes when it's really close and obvious and there's a huge, humongous transit coming, but you can't do it from a birth chart. At least I don't know anybody who can. Okay. There are two systems for predicting life expectancy in medieval astrology. One is from Ptolemy, where you find a point called the epheta, which is a giver of life. It's the releaser that was being talked about. The giver of life is actually a translation of the Arabic term high leg, or Romanized Arabic term high leg, giver of life. And when the giver of life is directed by primary directions, just say directed will do for the moment, to an aspect of a killing planet called an anoreta, the person dies. The rules for this in Ptolemy are extremely complicated and obscure and have been subject to a lot of interpretation. Ptolemy is seldom clear at the critical moments. The other method was to look to see if the highleg / epheta was received. Now, in this particular case, the reception could be by a minor rulership. In fact, the most popular receptions was by a minor rulership. If the ephetic point or highlegical point was received by one of its rulers, then that ruler became the giver of years, or al-Qaqidan in corrupt Persian. And Montomo explicitly states that the ephetic or highlegical point gives the matter of the body, and the al-Qaqidan gives the form. And so what he's saying is these are both perfectly reasonable methods for predicting death. In the first case, the Ptolemaic, the form is destroyed, the matter is destroyed. Form cannot exist independently of corrupt matter, at least not in this world. Translation, there are no such things as ghosts, which is basically a form of soul living without its body. But he says, at the same time, if the years of the al-Qaqidan expire, then the form deteriorates. Either one of these can indicate death. But he says it's most likely to be if the highleg epheta is afflicted at the same time the years of the al-Qaqidan expires, gangbusters guaranteed it's the end of the road. But the point I want you to notice is the argument is entirely couched in terms of the rule being matter and the ruler being form. Here's another instance. In Schurner, there are two aphorisms cited which are not his, they're from somebody else, which demonstrate this form principle. He states the following, roughly paraphrased: If you're looking to see how the affairs of the father worked out, look at the son and look at its triplicity lords and their domicile lords. So you have the triplicity lords and the domicile lords of the triplicity lords. The only example of a two-level rulership I know of in the medieval material. He said, if the son is in good shape, but the triplicity lords and their rulers are in poor shape, say that the father in early life was powerful and strong, but in later life he came to no good end. The formal principle rules the outcome. The rulers rule the outcome. And then he states below that, if the son is in poor condition, but the triplicity lords and their rulers are in good condition, say that the father started out poor and in bad circumstances, but ended his life in positions of power and eminence. So there you see a concrete example of the principle that the ruler indicates the outcome of the house. The outcome being the formal final principle, the formal and final principle, and also the efficient cause. But this process only works if the ruler receives the house. It has to make an aspect of the house. So immediately, if you are evaluating the condition of a house in your chart using traditional rulerships, you want to find out if one of the rulers, doesn't have to be the sign ruler, by the way, if one of the rulers is making an aspect of the house, it should be at the very least the triplicity lord. If it's the bond lord or term lord or face lord, it's not very potent. But you want ideally the domicile or exaltation lord to aspect the house by major aspect by sign. No orb is required here. So a house is truly debilitated if none of its rulers aspect it. That means the affairs of that house will have difficulty evolving toward their final end. So that's the principle of reception right there. The house must be received. By the way, a planet in the house can also be received, but then again, since I use whole sign houses, that's the same thing. Question?
By any of its rulers. So exaltation ruler?
Yes, but the triplicity ruler is the lowest one I'd care to take seriously. The only exception would be if you have bound and face ruler both doing it, you might get away with
So
that.
you can use those.
You could use those if they're both doing it.
They're both doing it.
If they're both doing it.
Bound and face.
Yes, or bound in triplicity or face in triplicity. Again, double rulerships by a minor dignity are considered somewhat effective. The earliest sources, however, say only domicile and exaltation, and I'd say that's far more reliable.
An example?
Okay?
I suppose not by its detriment.
Okay, this is a woman named Pamela Smart, or as I like to refer to her as Pamela Not So Smart, who was a very sexy young high school teacher and conspired with 2 of her students to kill her husband. She was caught. She is now enjoying a life sentence as a guest of the state of New Hampshire. Okay. Now, let's see what we got here. I don't know if this chart has an example. I'm hoping it does. First house ruler is the moon. The moon aspects the first house. No problem. Except, of course, that the moon is debilitated. That's a problem. The moon is debilitated. It's a detriment. Having the ruler of a house aspecting the house but debilitated is not as bad as not having the ruler aspect at all, but it ain't great. The worst situation is having the ruler debilitated and not aspecting. That is the most difficult. General principle here, by the way, is the worst connection 2 planets can have is no connection. Known in Greek as apostrophe, aversion, and in medieval astrology is inconjunct or disjunct, which means not joined. This is not a case of disjunction, but it's a case of a house having a debilitated ruler. We go to the second house, the sun is in it, no problem. We go to the fourth house, third house actually, but the IC is in it. It's ruled by Mercury. Where is Mercury? Mercury's in Leo. Oops. See the problem? Adjacent signs, no aspect. The third house has, the third house's ruler does not aspect it. So this is a situation I'm talking about. I don't know what that meant concretely in her life, but that's what we have. Now we go to the fourth house, which is, by the way, Mercury is both exaltation and domicile lord of Virgo, so we only have to look at Mercury. Now we go to the fourth house, which is the sign ruler of which, excuse me, my mouth was running away with me here. The sign ruler of Libra is Venus, no aspect. They're adjacent. The exaltation ruler is Saturn, we have it. Exaltation ruler will do. If in a horary question, neither the house ruler or the moon aspects the first house, the answer to the question is immediately no. Or the question is irrelevant, screwed up in some other way. Okay, now we go to the fifth house, which is Scorpio. Mars is in it, no problem. Neptune is in it, more of a problem. Would anybody care to guess what this woman's capacity for having children is? Forget it. And not because she's incapable, but because she's enjoying a life sentence in prison. There are many ways of becoming infertile. Yeah, that's possible.
Yeah, how can you read that out?
Okay, how do I read it? Okay, if you know your traditional astrology, having a water sign in the fifth is great. Having the ruler of a water sign, having the ruler of the fifth in a water sign is also great. Okay, we got Mars. The problem is we've also got Neptune. And that tends to screw up the process. Also, Mars may be the ruler of childbirth in this chart, but Mars in the fifth house is considered to be a negative indication for having children. It doesn't prevent it, it merely lowers the number. I have Mars in the fifth and I have one daughter, period. It's more significant, of course, in a woman's chart because she's the one who actually does the work of giving birth. But the Neptune combined with the Mars in the fifth is a very poor indication. Now, for those of you who might have it, who want to have children, no, it does not mean you can't have children. It does mean you may require some technological assistance.
South node on the cusp of the fifth would certainly tend to eat your children.
I can't hear you.
South node on the cusp of the fifth would certainly tend to eat your children.
The south node on the cusp of the fifth is probably not helpful either, I would agree. Although I don't have quite the negative I don't have quite the negative attitude toward the south node that's common among traditionalists. Even the medieval lore on the south node is murky. There are are two basic things about the nodes in medieval astrology. One of them is that the north node is benefic and the south node is malefic. That's the one you're coming from. The other one is more interesting, but I don't know if it's true. The north node intensifies the quality of a planet and the south node remits it. So the north node makes benefics more benefics and malefics more malefic, and the south node inverts them, or at least tends to invert them. I don't know if this is true. I haven't been able to tell. The doctrine I personally use doesn't come from astrology. It comes from a related discipline called geomancy, which is an Arabic divinatory technique, and two of the figures in it are the north and south node. And there's actually some concrete lore about what they mean, which I do find useful. The north node indicates passages that go inward, upward, or forward. And the south node indicates passages that go backward, downward, or outward. The implication of that is the north node is pro-evolutionary and the south node is not. However, if you've gone down the wrong road, the south node is the way out. So the south node actually has a positive function. But all things being equal, I would agree that the south node right there at the beginning of the fifth sign is not particularly good news. Sixth house, Sagittarius, Jupiter is the ruler. Jupiter trines it, the sixth house is received. The seventh house, now this gets interesting. Seventh house is Capricorn, it's ruled by Saturn, which squares it. Any aspect is better than no aspect, but this one doesn't really cut it. Let me explain why. The moon is in Capricorn, ruled by Saturn. This is a reception. Hey, what could be wrong with that? Here is the exception to the reception rule. You heard it referred to a bit in Moses' talk earlier today. Actually, he was referring to a different variation of it. The ruler, Saturn, is in fall. Retrograde doesn't help, but the real issue is ruler Saturn is in fall. Debilitated planets cannot receive. Because remember, the ruling planet is a formal principle. When a formal principle is in a debilitated sign of debilitation, it means the form is remiss or weak. Weak forms that have no power behind them, have trouble imposing themselves on the matter which they are working with. So this actually turns out to be, because both elements of the square are in major debility, a very negative Moon-Saturn square. Now, I hear you ask, isn't that a rather wide Moon-Saturn square? And the answer is no for two reasons. The lesser reason is it is within the moiety of medieval orbs. I will give you a demonstration and then I'll move on because orbs are not precisely what we're talking about. The moon's orb is plus or minus 6 degrees, or a total of 12. Medieval orbs are diameters, not radii. You'll see big figures. What you need to know is you use half that figure. So the moon's orb stated in modern terms is plus or minus 6. Saturn's orb in modern terms is plus or minus 4.5. You add 6 to 4.5 to get 10.5. Are they within that degree value? They are. Therefore, this aspect is forming. More important reason, however, the way more important reason, is that between the moon and Saturn there are no other aspect rays. The moon is applying without interruption to the square of Saturn. That means the square is basically fully baked. In the case of the moon, orbs appear to be somewhat irrelevant. If the moon's next aspect is to another planet, it really does not matter how wide the orb is as long as the moon does not have to change signs to get to it and no other aspect intervenes. If you can have the moon at 1 degree of a sign and a planet at 29 degrees of a sign, if the planet doesn't leave the sign, if the 29 degree one doesn't leave the sign and the moon doesn't hit anything on the way to that planet, the aspect is in effect. The moon's aspects do go by sign, at least applying. Separating, use the moiety of orbs. But applying, all the moon requires is no interruption. So this 6 degree orb is actually well within, actually more like 5 something, is well within range, and therefore this is a fully baked, genuinely malefic Moon-Saturn square. Another thing that doesn't help is this is a nocturnal chart, and Saturn works more negatively at night than it does in the daytime, because Saturn is a diurnal planet. Okay, so this is a failed reception. Yes.
It's more obvious to me that the moon is angular, and that's why it's such a strong aspect.
That's also true, yes. The moon is angular, yeah, absolutely, no argument with that. The moon is angular, which also makes it a strong aspect. Yes. So add that to the pile, for sure. Okay. Let's see if we have any other. So it's mainly houses 3 and 4 that have, well, mainly house 3 does not have a ruler aspecting it. Now, house 3 is brothers and sisters, but now we come to a peculiarity of whole sign houses, at least as I interpret them. The IC is in the 3rd house. And Vedius Valens, I've forgotten which book, but Vedius Valens clearly states that when the IC is in a house other than the 4th, that house does double duty. He says this about the IC and the MC. So the 3rd house is actually not only brothers and sisters, but also parents, early home, real estate, and so forth, in these capacities also along with Libra. Libra and Virgo both do 4th house functions. Libra because it's the 4th sign, Virgo because the IC is in it. So the 3rd house actually is important because there's an angle in it. So this is very serious to have a house with an angle in it that is not received by its ruler. The psychological implication is that there is something seriously malformed about her early childhood and her early family experience. And the fact that Uranus happens to be right on the IC contributes no small amount to that judgment. But, put the two together and you're getting something really quite rip-roaring. Any questions about this?
Related to that,
Yeah, hang on. See if the other. Hey, it worked. Okay, yeah.
the superior versus inferior aspect, when a planet is just into Aries and the other one's in late zodiac, which one's the superior?
Oh, the moon, I believe, is superior to Saturn. Because if you put Saturn on the ascendant, the moon would be on the midheaven. That's the logic of it. Is that your understanding? Yeah. Superior position. It's all, this is, by the way, a medieval term. This is one I haven't done much with. It's medieval as well as Hellenistic. Yeah. Okay. Let me just skip past this a moment. Yeah, I'll go back to Mohandas Gandhi in a moment, but this is the hierarchy of aspect potency in Bonatti. And let me start by pointing out the bottom here. Conjunctions with reception are powerful. Separating conjunctions and separating aspects are weaker than applying ones. Okay? So you'll notice the conjunction isn't listed up here. Just understand that a conjunction with reception is a very powerful combination. I have a modest example in my chart. I have the moon in Scorpio, which is its fall. But the first aspect the moon makes is a conjunction with Mars in Scorpio. Doesn't mean I don't have issues with the moon and Mars, but basically means it works. Because the Mars is a dignified ruler receiving the application of the debilitated moon. Just means I like women with a lot of Mars. My wife has Mars conjunct the ascendant. Okay. And we get along okay. As long as he gets what she wants. You ever hear this tape? That's a joke. Okay.
Hey.
So, the best of all combinations. By the way, you have a question?
I got a comment about that. When you said that the North Node was the passage up,
Yeah.
and since North Node's conjunct Uranus right now, and Uranus means heaven, could we call that the stairway to heaven?
Sure, why not?
Okay.
Sounds good. Stairway to the Stars. An old song by Dreary song. Okay. By the way, if you change the word reception to mutual reception, you can ratchet it up another notch. Mutual reception is much hairier than a simple reception. But I'm talking about simple receptions. There's no one place where Bonatti says this, but there's a chapter in Bonatti where he's talking about indications that the matter will come to pass. And he consistently applies this principle in that section. Okay, the most powerful of all indications that something will come to pass is applying trine with reception. The second level is applying trine without reception or asexual with reception. And this is what I want you to notice. The reception boosts the goodness of the aspect up a notch. Then we have applying sextile without reception is about the same of goodness as a square with reception. Remember FDR's mutual reception with a square in it? The fundamental outcome of that Venus-Saturn square was positive because in his relationship with Eleanor, that their ceasing to be functionally husband and wife, i.e. sleep together, was replaced by them becoming a partnership, professional partnership of great power. So the loss of the sexual relationship created a practical relationship which was, in terms of his career at least, worth a hell of a lot more than the personal relationship. That's how it worked. Goodness came about through an unfortunate incident. That's the way squares of reception tend to work. A good thing happens because of something that initially looked bad. It's funny, people who are having affairs seem to have this desperate knowledge to have them discovered. I don't know if any of you can speak from experience, but in his case, he did what lovers always do. He kept all the letters, and he took them with him to Europe when they were beginning the negotiations that led to the Versailles Treaty at the end of World War I. And he had them lovingly stored in his trunk when he came back, which he asked his wife to unpack. How done can you get?
He was very ill, that's what happened.
Yeah, that's right. He was very ill, but he shouldn't have had them in there at all. That's the point.
He was still 2 years away from the polio, though.
Yes, he was. It wasn't polio; it was the Spanish influenza.
Right.
Yeah. The polio turned the thing around. There's another example. By the way, one of those planets is in the 6th house too. The polio turned it around.
It may not have actually been polio. There's now talk that it's Alzheimer's syndrome, but that's besides.
Well, he spent all his time trying to cure polio patients. So
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't know that, but I'm not surprised. What are you trying to do?
Stop it from killing.
Oh, that wasn't my computer doing that, was it?
Yeah, it's personal timing.
Oh, I thought I forgot the terms from ESL. Sorry, when I rebooted. Yeah, I didn't even know I turned it on. In fact, it installed itself. Watch out for Timaeus. It's self-installing. That is my computer doing that?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I thought it was wind chimes. Really good sound. Okay. Unfortunately, we have to stop the slideshow to fix that. Hopefully nothing will change. Hit the angles for a while. Okay, so we have applying square with reception actually does bring about the result, but usually through somewhat difficult circumstances. It's still a square, but it isn't going to fail necessarily. The next level is applying square without reception, opposition with reception. And then applying opposition without reception is the worst way of being joined of all, except for no application at all. In horary astrology, if the two significators of the querent and the quasitive, translation into ordinary English, the planet ruling the person asking the question and the planet ruling the thing being asked about, if these two planets make no application to aspect at all, that's the answer. The answer is no. Lee Lehman likes to refer to these last two categories as it might happen, but you'll regret it. Okay. See what the next one is. Oops, there is no next one. Okay, good. A lot of stuff going over the angles here. By the way, what time is it supposed to stop so I can gauge myself?
You got about 1:45, so you got about 45 minutes.
Okay, good. What I'm going to do when I'm finished with these case studies is take charts from the audience. And I prefer that you had a mystery question you would like to have answered about your chart. Well, actually, no. What we'll do is we'll look at your houses and receptions, period. So it doesn't matter who you are. There is only one rule I ask of all persons in workshops who want their charts looked at. Two rules. One, you must be willing to be truthful. And two, you must not have something to hide. If you have something to hide, don't volunteer. And because when I do workshops, I am not exhibiting my chart side manner, as somebody once called it. when you're doing readings for people, you want to be constructive, helpful, and you don't want the person to go walking out of the office on all hands and knees crying, hopefully. But in a workshop, what we're trying to do is to demonstrate a principle not to do a reading. So, if you really feel that what you're asking about might lead into some delicate, difficult areas, do not ask. Because I will not be trying terribly hard to make you feel good. I won't be trying to make you feel bad either. I simply want to have the truth, as you understand it, at least. Gandhi. This is another incredible case of deceptions. Let's just take a look here. We have the moon at 19 Leo. Its ruler is the sun. The moon is not received by the sun because the sun is in fall. So it could be received by sign because there's a sextile by sign. Still, it would be a weak reception at best. But the sun being in Libra makes it truly a weak reception. Okay. The most interesting thing in this chart is what the moon is doing. The moon is participating in a truly spectacular T-square. See it? Now, prior to my working with medieval astrology, I would have looked at this T-square and said, oh God, how do you read this thing? You read it by taking the order in which the aspects occur. It is a general principle in medieval astrology that aspects that are applying at birth have their impact after the birth, and aspects that are separating at birth have had their impact prior to birth. They represent conditions passing away. Same rule applies to horary. And this is a very important point. It has been stated in much 20th century astrological literature that horary and natal astrology operate by fundamentally different rules. No, untrue. It's just that horary preserved the traditional methods more authentically than natal astrology did. Medieval natal astrology works with exactly the same principles as horary, except there are some techniques that are not appropriate to be used in questions, and there are some techniques that are not appropriate to be used in horary. One would not, for example, want to primary direct a horary chart. It's not worth the effort. And in a horary chart, you are not dealing with things that may take place many, 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 many years ahead, usually. I mean, I can't deny that it can be done, but horary is usually very immediate. So the long-range techniques of natal astrology are not terribly relevant to horary. The rest of the horary apparatus works perfectly and should be used. All right, what is the moon doing, since we're talking about that? The moon is separating from a square of Mars and applying to a square of Jupiter. I think that's, let me see if there's anything else in here. Yeah, that's right. The moon is separating from the square of Mars, 18 to 19, and applying to the square of Jupiter, 1956 to 2010. Now, the Moon-Mars square is clearly the more malefic of the two squares. Just from the general nature of the Moon and Mars. It's a difficult combination. By the way, since the issue has come up a few times in this conference, let me make my position on malefic and benefic clear. My definition of malefic is very simple. It is a combination, it is an energy which, statistically speaking, people tend to screw up. It doesn't mean that it's hopelessly evil, degraded, or bad. And in fact, I can cite you some very authoritative 4th century sources which deny this. It means that we have trouble working with those energies. The energies are not intrinsically evil. The planets, as Plotinus put it, do not care enough about us to wish to do harm. Well, I'm not sure they're quite that uncaring. I don't think caring is an appropriate adjective to be assigned to planets. But the point is, they do not intend harm, nor do they intend good. They're just signifying. A benefic is a combination which, statistically speaking, most people can handle. So it's a matter of consciousness and wisdom that really determines whether a combination is benefic or malefic. If you can screw up a benefic combination, think of Jupiter and overeating and you get a general idea. Or in my case, not so much overeating, but I still gain weight. Jupiter is retrograde in my first house and out of sect. Okay, but it does good stuff too. It's a mixed bag. So the moon is separating from its arguably most difficult aspect and applying to one that is somewhat better. The key point here is that the moon is almost finished with its passage through the double opposition. Okay, if you take this chart and analyze the aspects, when the aspects occurred in time, what you discover in Gandhi's chart is that the positive, powerful, creative aspects occurred after he was born, and the difficult, hairy, negative ones occurred before. So he was born, but they're all so close that the energies are really intense. Question?
I guess this is probably stupid, but
No, never say that. Go ahead and ask.
I mean, if like the moon and Mars are in the same degree, so partile, but separate, the Mars is separating. Would you say separating or just partile?
I'd say partile.
Whatever.
Partile.
Okay.
I don't think separation truly begins until the planets move out of the degree of the aspect.
Okay.
My observations with Hellenistic astrology, and while I'm not currently with Project Hindsight, if you look at the translations, I was in on most of them. My experience with Hellenistic astrology is that it works by quanta. The degrees are little spaces. Half a degree, 3/4 degree, doesn't really matter. Degree is the big deal. The signs ditto even more so. In Greek astrology, you cannot have out of sign aspects because if you think of the houses or signs as being rooms with walls and the planets as being lights, the light doesn't go outside of the walls, but the light does go to the rooms that it can see, and those rooms are also illuminated, but the rooms to either side of them are not. See the principle?
Yeah.
And this seems to also work by degrees to a lesser extent.
Okay. So even with the Hellenistic material that I've heard, they have that degree-based aspects, and those are like 3 degrees.
Yeah.
Within 3 degrees of those, I thought you could go, 2 different signs. They do overlap in signs. Yeah, they don't in the medievals, not until later.
Right.
But that answers the question because there is one interesting exception, which I call the Ibn Ezra escape clause. If a planet is in the last degree of a sign and the next aspect is in the first 3 of the next sign, then what he does is consider the aspect as having already formed, but the aspect rays are all in the next sign. So that may be a survival of that idea. Okay. But in medieval astrology, by and large, out-of-sign aspects are verboten. Although there are things that can make them come back, but they're not. It's not the out-of-signness that's being overcome, and something else is happening. So, at any rate, the moon is not partilely square Jupiter because this is in the 20th degree of Leo, and this is in the 21st degree of Taurus. When the moon actually crosses the degree boundary, they will then be partile. Then the moon leaves town. It doesn't have anything more to do with this opposition. All right, now let's look at the receptions in this thing. Venus is in Scorpio, applying to a conjunction of its ruler Mars in Scorpio. That means Venus is a debilitated planet received by a dignified ruler. Arguably, the Venus, therefore, when he's conscious, is not debilitated. Effect. Gandhi very consciously used his own sexuality to pursue his spiritual enlightenment. He used sexual energy to achieve spiritual enlightenment. And he used to demonstrate this as an old man by sleeping with his nieces. And nobody ever saw any evidence that any hanky-panky occurred. Of course, he was 80, so it may not have been possible. But he himself said that when he was a young man, his sexuality was very hard for him to control. Early life, later life. You see the principle? Okay. Now Jupiter is in Taurus. Taurus is ruled by Venus. Venus can't receive because it's in detriment, but Venus is received by a dignified ruler. So you might argue, and I don't know if I would care to, you might argue that there's sort of electricity going from Venus to Mars to Jupiter, which makes Jupiter received. I don't know. All I do know is that Mars is the end point of this whole thing. Pluto, of course, cannot receive because it does not have rulership or dignity. Pluto is just in on it, and Venus is actually applying to the Pluto. Then it goes to the Mars. Now that also weakens reception a bit, by the way. If there's an intervening aspect, the reception is real, but it's weaker. The most important aspect a planet can make is the next one. as long as no sign change is involved. The most important aspect the planet makes is the next one. Orbs are much less important in Arabic astrology than the order of applications and separations. They have orbs, and the orbs became more and more prominent in the Latin versions of medieval astrology, but in the original Arabic astrology, orbs are relatively unimportant. You do find them, they're there, no question, but they're relatively unimportant. Okay. What other things do we have here? Midheaven is ruled by the moon does not receive the midheaven. That could be a problem. However, not necessarily, because Jupiter is the exaltation lord of the midheaven. Jupiter sextiles the midheaven. The midheaven is received, the 10th house is not a disaster. Good. Oh, by the way, I'd like to call your attention to the house that is stressed by this opposition. Yeah, he accomplished great things and he was assassinated as a result. This is all winding up in the 8th house. Okay, the 11th house is Leo and the sun is in the 12th. That is an aspect by sign. Now, as I said, the sun can't receive, but it does prevent the 11th house from having no aspect by its rulers. The 11th house is in poor condition, but not catastrophic. The 12th house is Virgo. Mercury is down here in Scorpio. Scorpio, therefore, aspects the 12th house, therefore the 12th house is received. The first house is Libra, which is ruled by Venus, and since this is a diurnal chart, we also have to look at Saturn. Well, I would anyway. Venus is in Scorpio, adjacent to Libra. It does not receive the sun, therefore, but Saturn does, and in fact, they're an applying aspect to boot. So the sun is received by Saturn. The first house is received by Saturn, so is the sun, actually. There is reception here, therefore the first house is in potentially okay shape. Second house ruler has Mars in it, dignified, no problem, at least from that point of view. So, remember, the issue here is not whether the house turns out beautifully. The issue is whether the house manifests its potential. That's the issue. So I'm talking about the potential here, not the gorgeousness of it. If I'm coining a word. Fourth house, did I do the third? No. Okay, third house is ruled by Sagittarius, and only by by Jupiter, only by Jupiter. The third house is not received. Third house has a problem. Fourth house is Capricorn, ruled by Saturn and Mars. Saturn is adjacent, no go. Mars, however, is sextile away, therefore, and dignified. So the fourth house is actually in pretty good shape. Fifth house, also ruled by Saturn. Saturn aspects by sextile. Sixth house is Pisces, ruled by Jupiter. There's a sextile, no problem. And Venus trines, therefore doubly no problem. Seventh house is Aries, which is ruled by the sun, by Mars as a sign ruler, and Sun as exaltation and triplicity lord. The sun opposes, and Mars does not aspect. Quite. Well, no, Mars does not aspect. There is if there were a planet here, exactly at 18 degrees and change, Mars would aspect that planet because they are in signs that have the same ruler, and that's the one legal form of quincunx. If signs have the same ruler, the partile quincunx is a valid combination. Ditto the semisextile between Capricorn and Aquarius. Not something I see very often in the literature, but everybody seems to agree that it's true, and then nobody does it. That's usually a bad sign. It means that there's a difference between the theoretical position of the astrologers and what they actually do. This shouldn't be a surprise. We have the same problem. Okay. Eighth house, ruled by Venus and the moon. Venus opposes, the moon squares. Therefore, the moon, by the way, is receiving the Jupiter and the Pluto fairly strongly. The moon may not be received, but it receives. So the Jupiter-Pluto in the 8th is, or rather the 8th house is prominent and powerful, and yes, of course, now this is what I mean by potential. What happens when the 8th house is prominent by potential? It means the death may bring about something important. It doesn't mean the death will be lovely. There are other things that can indicate a lovely death, but this isn't one of them. Yes?
Just thought I'd mention, since you're talking about that when he was assassinated, Saturn was at 20 Leo, and the nodes, the south node was at 19 Scorpio, north node at 19 Taurus. So it really sort of emphasizes all that.
Yeah, great, thank you. I haven't actually checked the assassination, but that's the sort of thing I'd expect. Yeah, very good. Okay. What do you easy here? Ninth house, Mercury ruled. Mercury is not aspecting it. There really is no other ruler of Gemini besides Mercury that amounts to anything. Therefore, this is interesting. The ninth house is not received. Well, you know, here's a great spiritual leader with a ninth house that isn't received. What the hell is going on here? I don't really have a quick answer for that, except that he's not really a ninth house type spiritual leader. He's a 12th house type. You know, the person who renounces the world, who sacrifices, and so forth. So in other words, he wasn't a philosopher. He was an ascetic. That's a 12th house type. Earlier, the mention was made of 12th house having virtues. This is one of its virtues. If you have a lot of 12th house stuff, you may have a future as a renunciate. If you don't like that, you have a problem. Or you can be a person who likes to work alone. Now, there are all kinds of ways of making the 12th house work, really. Its reputation is somewhat for evil is somewhat overblown. And having said that, I will tell you a story about a client I had who had a particularly nasty-looking 12th house, and during the early 1940s, the 12th house was afflicted horribly. And I said, what happened during that period? She said, we spent the entire war hiding in a basement. She was Jewish, fleeing the Nazis. They spent the entire war living in one room in somebody's basement. It worked! Imprisonment. But, okay, so that would be my explanation for the ninth house. And having said that, I need to say that there are also other things that I would look at before I would determine a person's capability as a spiritual leader, the most important of which is the part of spirit, or lot of spirit. I think the lot of spirit is incredibly important in looking for a person's ability to self-actualize. But that's another lecture.
His time is disputed, too.
What?
Isn't his time disputed?
This seems to, okay, this data comes from the Blackwell database. Arthur Blackwell is a former partner. By the way, the precision of that time is bogus. It's the local mean time converted into Greenwich Mean Time. The local time is given rather round. And he did extremely careful work in his sources, and I'd be inclined to accept this as being the most likely of any competing charts. Yeah.
Anyway, it's generally agreed that he died not too long after sunrise, like an hour or so after sunrise.
Being born.
Born, yes.
Yeah.
So that's...
this is going to be in the ballpark.
Yeah, exactly.
With whole sign houses, we've at least got the right house.
Exactly.
This, by the way, is the virtue of whole sign houses I want you all to appreciate. You just have to get the sign right. Now, it's nice to have the degree in minute, but if you got the sign right, you're in business. The clients I really don't like to deal with are the ones who have ascendants like 29 degrees in 55 minutes. 2 or 3 good sneezes and it goes into the next house. But where I find whole sign houses really compelling is they give far and away, for my purposes, the best objective description of the conditions of the person's life. So I start asking questions which would be true of one sign but not the other. And usually within 5 minutes, I know which sign is rising. One example was with one rising degree, with one rising sign, the person showed no evidence of having ever lived in a foreign country, and this is a person who was born in a foreign country. When you moved it into the next sign, the combination that I find in people who live in foreign countries became in loud and clear. That combination is an interaction among the rulers of 4, 9, and 1 houses. Now, it may be the ruler of the 4th and the 9th, the ruler of the 9th and the 4th, or the ruler of the 4th and 9th aspecting each other. Any one of those, the first makes it, if the first ruler gets involved, that's a little stronger. I haven't found too many exceptions, although there was a gentleman attending this conference, of course, who had to be an exception. But what was interesting is if I used the Fortuna chart, it was there. It was in the Fortuna chart, not the Ascendant chart. And this leads me to think that there may be conditions under which the Fortuna chart is more valid than the Ascendant chart. But I don't know what they are yet. So that's something to play with. Okay. I I guess we covered them all actually at this point. So we only have the 9th and one other house, like I guess it's the third rather, where we do not have the house received. You will all have houses that are not received by their rule, well, maybe not all, but it's common. Where it becomes important is if it's the case with most of the houses. That indicates that the person's got a serious problem. Okay. We've done that, and that's all, folks, for that. Now, I would like a volunteer. You're on, okay. Schmuck pop bang. Let's see, I'll stand up as soon as I get the chart here. Okay. You'll see I'm a little retro. It's a Solar Fire version 5. It's not that I don't like 6. The last time I inquired at Astrolabe about 6, they said don't get it yet, and I haven't asked recently. Yeah. I certainly saw features in it I liked. Okay, just give me first name. Lyndon? Oh, okay, Lindsay, okay. Lindsay. Why? Time, date? Okay. Time?
2:16 p.m.
Oh, good. Not round. Place? El Paso. Whoops. Texas. You're going to see a slightly different looking chart now because I need all the stuff. Okay. That's my personal chart form. I've seen others more complicated this weekend, in fact. But this one's fairly hairy. Okay. Okay. I hope you can see it reasonably well, especially if I get out of the way. All right, so we have a Leo ascendant with Uranus conjunct the ascendant. Well, actually, you're a born conformist. There is one thing, however, you do need to know about. Those degrees are in the middle of the constellation of Cancer, and they are somewhat in accident and illness prone. It's the Chrysope and the Chrysope, the Beehive, and the Ocelli. And that's roughly the same ascendant, I believe, as George W. Bush, but I won't hold it against you. What that means basically is try to avoid situations where injury could easily occur because it might. Have you ever had a dangerous accident, especially to the eyes?
Only one in my life, which is not my house.
No. Yeah. The ones that other people cause you can't do much about. All right. So let's just start the analysis in terms of receptions, more or less the manner I've been doing it. Now, this is not exactly the way I would start doing a chart reading, but this is the workshop on receptions. Somewhere in the course of the chart reading, all of this would happen. And let me make one thing perfectly clear. I am not speaking from theory. I do this. I see 10 or more clients a week when I'm not studying for exams. I actually make my living doing astrology, and this is how I do it. Now, that doesn't mean I'm right, but it means I'm not making such idiotic mistakes that my clients are running away in droves. I'm sure there are other ways of doing things and the ways I do them which are equally effective, but I want to let you know this is not a theoretical construct. That's all I'm trying to tell you. Okay? The main reason I do charts still, in fact, is to try out my techniques. It's awful. But I'm careful. I don't say something. I say, just as a matter of research, did you find that, ... That's how I do it when I'm trying out something new. And I say, okay, just trying something out. Okay, Leo rising, which makes the position of the sun extraordinarily important. And here we have a bit of a problem right at the outset because the sun is in Pisces, which is disjunct from Leo. Okay, so this does present a bit of a problem. We have Uranus rising with the significance of which is obvious. I don't think we need to give a Uranus lesson here. Second house is Virgo, which is ruled by Mercury. And Mercury is disjunct from Aries. Okay. I don't know quite what the disjunction of the sun ruling the ascendant does, but the disjunction of Mercury with the second house means that insofar as you make money, you're doing it through some other symbolism. The Virgo ruling the second, the Virgo on the second is not the way in which you make money, because the Mercury can't help Virgo. What would I do to find another route? I would go to Vedic valence. I would look at the sign of the part of fortune and the 11th sign from the part of fortune, and this is not medieval, as you know, guys back there. This is pure valence. The place of acquisition is the 11th sign from the sign of the part of fortune. This is one of those areas where valence comes very close to the Hindu methods, because in Hindu astrology, the 11th sign from the ascendant is a place in which you make money. In valence, it's the 11th sign from the part of fortune. It is my humble opinion that we should probably also be using the 11th sign from the ascendant like the Vedic astrologers do. But we have the part of fortune. It's in the 12th house, which is not necessarily a bad thing at all. And the 11th sign is the 10th house, which is actually quite okay. So we would look to Cancer and Taurus and the rulers to get the means by which you make a living. Not what you do for a life, not the nature of your career, but how well you make a living. Well, let's see. The midheaven, this is a diurnal chart. The midheaven, we also look at the midheaven, but it's in Taurus, so that takes care of that problem. So we would look at Venus first and the moon second. Venus is in the 7th house. When the ruler of the midheaven, or the 10th house is in the 7th house, it's an indication of a career that works by doing consulting, contract work, or work one-to-one dealing with people. Like astrologers often have a 10-7 interaction. Okay. Going from the 12th house, it's ruled by the moon, and the moon is in the 8th. So that would indicate that making money has something to do with an 8th house activity, which is reinforced by the fact that the ruler of the first is in the 8th. What do you do?
Trade stocks.
Trade stock? Okay, other people's money. Do you trade stocks in your own account, or do you give financial advice? Your own account. Okay, so the 7th house is not happening as yet. Do you do astrological consultations?
I do consultations with an astrological and also the artist consultation.
Okay, the artist is coming, that's the Venus, but the house placement of the Venus is not particularly evident in what you do. So what you're doing at the moment is you're dividing your career up into 2 independent activities, or your means of making a living, more precisely. Your career is probably the art. That's probably what you do for life. But what you do to make money is the ruler of the part of fortune being in the 8th house. Okay. Now, the one thing I would say about the sun being disjunct the ascendant is you should be, especially with Uranus conjunct the ascendant, is you really do need to watch your cardiovascular health very closely. That's dangerous. Doesn't mean you're going to have a heart attack, especially these days, with all the prevention techniques. Very important principle. Traditional astrology makes statements based on the assumption that modern technology does not exist. For example, according to medieval astrology, I should have died before the age of 12, probably in early infancy. They're right. Given the medieval medicine, I would have. But now we have to go and direct the feta to an affliction by the anoretta or something of the sort to get my life expectancy, because I've outlived my medieval life potential already. But I had, before the age of 4, several infant diseases that would in the 19th century have definitely killed me. And so the life expectancy techniques of medieval astrology will indicate when the life crisis occurred, but they will not actually give you the life expectancy. You found that about the Vedic ones as well? Yeah. Yeah. So when I say that you have the potential for heart disease here, that does not mean you're going to have it. It just means you've got to watch it. Okay. The 3rd house, brothers and sisters, is unoccupied. It is ruled by Venus and Saturn is actually the dominant ruler because Saturn rules Libra by exaltation and triplicity in the daytime. But we look at Saturn even without that. Okay, Saturn is in late Sagittarius, therefore it aspects the 3rd house. What is Saturn doing? Saturn squares the Sun, which suggests that well, first of all, the Sun-Saturn square indicates, and with Sun ruling the ninth by L Newton, indicates that you may have had a difficult authority or father figure in early life where he wasn't there at all.
Correct.
Yeah. Was he difficult or not there?
It was difficult. I would say disciplinary.
Yeah. Overpowering father figure. Now, it looks to me like there's something involving brothers and sisters here as well, because Saturn is the L Newton of the third. L Newton means the planet that has the most rulership over. Yeah.
There were none, but the two infants before they both died in the womb.
Okay. No brothers actually, you lucked out. But that could be read as no brothers or sisters perfectly well, because Sun Saturn, you can indicate difficulty or absence. Okay. Fourth house is Scorpio. Jupiter is on the IC, and Neptune. Oh wow! You know what the Sun-Saturn square also does? It affects your physical appearance. You're sort of thin and wiry. Bone structure is fairly evident. That's a Saturnine appearance. Yeah, that's what that Sun-Saturn is doing to your first house. But anyway, the fourth house has Jupiter on the IC, which, speaking of somebody who has a similar situation, there is nothing quite as good to remedy a Sun-Saturn affliction as having a powerful Jupiter. And by position, if not by sign, that's the third most powerful place Jupiter can be in. The other ones are midheaven and ascendant tide, midheaven and ascendant tide, seventh is second, and IC is third. So that makes Jupiter fairly powerful. And here, by the way, is why you trade stocks. Jupiter Neptune is a gambler combination. Yeah. Speculation. That's modern astrology, obviously. There are no Neptune symbolism in the medievals. Whoops. Hit the escape button. Just the escape button. It's up the upper left-hand corner. Yeah, great, thanks. If you hit anything else, something may happen. That's why I like the escape button for the purpose. Okay. All right. So the Jupiter-Neptune combination in the fourth. Now, that just indicates a fondness for taking risks and that has something to do with your early life. But we really haven't alluded into why you should be doing stock market speculation. So we'll hold off on that for the present. Oh, actually, no, I'll hold off on it for the present.
I always thought it was Saturday.
No, that normally would be a reason not to do it. However, Jupiter rules the fifth. Actually, I can now make a statement about this. In early life, you would have felt you were unlucky, but as you get older, you become luckier and luckier. Where did I get that from? Saturn is the occupant of the fifth, and Jupiter is the lord of the fifth. And it's conjunct Neptune. So the ruler, what happens to the ruler comes into play later. Typically after the first Saturn return, maybe the second. So in other words, this is all coming out of first principles.
Robert?
Yeah?
Is the trading stocks because it's in the fourth house?
What?
Is the trading stocks because it's in the fourth
No, because Jupiter rules the fifth.
rules the fifth?
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, the fourth. All I know, Jupiter Neptune is a gambler in general. But when I said that, I realized I didn't have a way of gluing it with trading stocks. What glued it to trading stocks is that Jupiter is the fifth house lord. Remember the statement made by Moses several times, the planet always carries the signification of the house that it rules. This is just as true of traditional Western astrology as it is of Eastern. It's just been a bit faded in 20th century astrology. I do mean 20th century. The 21st century is already different. I now know this. Okay. So the only problem with the fifth house, of course, is that its ruler is disjunct. So you will, when that Saturn is afflicted, you will get slammed. How did you do when Pluto transited it, which is quite recently?
Well, try shorting the market from July all the way through February. But not with the same position, just finding it all the way up.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Your intuition was under a cloud.
That leads to the question that I have to ask.
Go ahead.
I promise you one question.
Go ahead.
Okay. The eclipse that recently happened with 28 Pisces, and then there was one last fall opposing that position. I'm still trying to figure out, what that's all about.
What was the question?
There was an eclipse on his sun recently, and previous to that, there was one opposing your sun.
Right, that's
Yeah.
all,
When the one on your sun just occurred.
Mhm.
Yeah. My best answer is that's slightly creepy making, actually, to be perfectly honest, because it's an 8th house sun ruling the ascendant. Be careful. Don't do anything stupid. This is not the time to take up extreme sports. If you read the 8th house as other people's money, I would also be, for at least 6 months after the eclipse, extraordinarily conservative in your trading. If you can make money at your regular work, if you have another form of income besides trading, use it. I would say you're in a dangerous period financially at present. 8th house is characteristic of people who invest money in stocks because they're working with money that isn't fully their own, especially because I'm sure you trade somewhat on margin, right?
Well, actually, I've been doing just the opposite. I've been very successful, and I'm not trading on margin.
So if you're not trading on margin, that will help enormously. Then it's not the 8th house, it's the first second. Yeah.
It's my money.
Yeah, well, that's better. You should not trade on margin in this period, is what I'm saying. Yeah. When you said you were shorting in those months, I forgot, was that good or bad? You were fighting the trend all the way up.
Well,
You
yeah,
said.
you can hedge that by also
Sure.
going with the trend.
Yeah.
But,
Did you?
yeah, of course.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, the downside of hedging, of course, is while you don't lose much, you don't make as much either. That was the thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Your instincts are very sound. So your instincts are quite, well, reason more accurately is very good at countering astrological influences.
Well, as you may know, and anybody who's active in the market will tell you, that period from July 2006 through the recent top was a truly rare period.
I know, it was astoundingly up. That's right, I remember now, it was astoundingly up, very fast.
So those of us who particularly study what Ray Merriman is espousing, we were all looking for a top the whole time.
Yeah, oh, okay, I see what's happening, yeah. So you were carefully trying to suss out the top.
Sure, yeah,
Yeah, okay. That was precisely the right way to do this. If you'd taken an extremely dangerous position, you would have been screwed. Guaranteed.
Some big boys did, and they shorted it all the way up, and they got wiped out.
Yeah. Well, my compliments to Ray on that one. I mean, if that's his system that made you do that, that's a very good sign.
No, even Ray had a very tough time. I mean, this was a truly rare situation. That's why we feel it's a very, very long-term top.
Yeah. Given that it collapsed right before the next Saturn-Neptune opposition, and we have another one in June, I think it's got a fair amount of downside potential.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, we left off in the 6th house, which is a place of illness. It's not the house of health, it's the house of illness. The 1st house is the house of health. The 1st house represents the vitality of the physical body. The 6th house is that which challenges it. Calling the 6th house a house of health is a euphemism. Read the word bad in front of it. It is, however, found in the charts, prominent in the charts of health professionals, because they are dealing with illness, not their own, hopefully. So that's valid. And it's found prominently in the charts of people who do good service work without particularly having any ego stake in it in general. It's a very anti-ego house. Like the 12th, but not quite as much so. Saturn is the ruler, Saturn is disjunct, Mars is the other ruler, Mars is disjunct. And, I'm not really sure that I regard that as a bad sign. This is a situation where you may not want a reception, but in general, I would say, given the Sun-Saturn square and Saturn's rulership over the 6th, the other area you have to watch out for is bone and joint problems as you get a bit older. Let me speak from personal experience. I have the Sun in the 6th, opposing Saturn in the 12th, and I have little bits of arthritis, bad feet, Saturn in the 12th, bad feet, all sorts of stuff like that. But it didn't come on until my 50s. If you run, keep on doing so, but don't run on pavement. Yes?
I notice people who have the Saturn in the 6th house usually always have to wash their
Yeah. Saturn in the 6th house is, all things being equal, not the greatest place to have it. Yeah. Okay, we're running near the end of this, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do a couple more and then we'll stop. Okay, 8th house is ruled by Jupiter and Venus. Jupiter is disjunct. Venus is So would Venus. Oh, yes, Jupiter's in Scorpio. Okay, Jupiter does aspect. Yes, I just wasn't looking at the numbers. I was looking at the apparent placement. 8th house is fine. Okay. Aside from the fact that it's the 8th house, it's fine. And that really isn't so bad. The Sun-Saturn square is the main problem. Speaking in terms of long-range potential, your death will undoubtedly be due to a Sun-Saturn ailment, but we don't know when. Doesn't mean early, it just means the quality of it. What?
Is Jupiter aspecting the 8th as its lord? Protect it a little bit?
Yes. That's why I would assume that it's probably not soon. A good death late of Sun-Saturn ailments. Good death, by the way, means surrounded by loved ones at home. Bad death would be things like dying in the wilderness and having your body torn apart by coyotes. I'm not kidding. They actually go into this stuff. There are two different places in the Hellenistic literature where there is a combination of being torn apart by wild dogs. I don't remember the combination, but there are two places in the Hellenistic literature. One of them, I think, is Ptolemy. I forgot what the other one is. Okay, 9,000. No, you don't have that. No, I don't think so. The 9th house is Aries, which is ruled by the Sun and Mars in Aquarius does aspect the 9th house, so you've got reception there by sign. Let me see if you have any reception by degree here. We haven't looked at that. I'll do that and finish up. I won't continue with this houses. You get the idea about this time how you evaluate a house. And obviously, it's better to have the ruler sextiling or trining the house and squaring that are opposing, but it's way better to have them doing any one of those than none of those. Okay. So, Uranus is ruled by the Sun. It does not aspect the Sun. Pluto is ruled by by Mercury, and it does not aspect Mercury. Jupiter is ruled by Mars. It does aspect Mars. Mars-Jupiter square is received. Hit the escape button. Okay, got it. The Mars-Jupiter square is received. Mars in Aquarius receives Jupiter in Scorpio. It would be stronger if Jupiter were not retrograde, because Jupiter is moving away from the square of Mars, and Mars is moving away from the square of Jupiter. But it's real close. So that actually gives you a bit of a lucky streak to counteract the Saturn and Sun. This translates, and I hear that you're doing this, so this is okay, I can say this. It means you will succeed. Your luck will come about as a result of a method, not as a result of luck. Yeah. He has to, in other words, work for a living, even if it is at something that's qualified as gambling. And all good people in the market do that. That's the way you win. Okay. Neptune is ruled. The Mars-Neptune square is also operative, and that one's applying. That was received, but a Mars-Neptune square is, that combination will be a little difficult on relationships, and that further messes up your relationship with your father. Did he have a drug or alcohol problem?
No.
Okay. And it certainly didn't come across as weak.
No.
Okay. Whenever I see that square, I ask that question. Did you ever?
Never have.
Right. Do you have the feeling, are you one of the people who avoids it because you have a feeling it would happen if you didn't?
That could be true.
Yeah.
Double Pisces.
Well, it's very common for people who have the potential for a drug or alcohol problem to realize it and avoid it like the plague. This is called doing the right thing. Okay. Saturn is in Sagittarius. It does not aspect Jupiter. Mars is in Aquarius. It does not aspect Saturn.
Yes, it does.
Venus is in Aquarius. It does not aspect by a sextile. It's a weak reception. Moon in Pisces is in a wide separated triangle with Jupiter, so it can be regarded as weakly received. The Sun in Pisces, ditto, trine by sign alone, weakly received. Mercury, in relation to Mars, is a sextile of wide or weakly received. But the strongest one is the Mars-Jupiter and the Jupiter and the Mars-Jupiter. The reason why it occurs to me on second thought that you probably don't have a drug or alcohol problem, nor did your father, is not Mars-Neptune, it's Mars-Jupiter-Neptune. That really is a gambler configuration. Put the Mars and becomes really strong. Stay with the method. But that really makes people want to speculate. This is a combination that comes from the Evertine school. Mars, Jupiter equals Neptune mainly the 3 planets being an aspect, is the most powerful indication of a person who gambles. Doesn't mean they're going to be good at it or bad at it, it means they really want to do it. So you better be good at it. Okay, I think we're out of time, so one question or statement?
Yeah, if you have any general interpretive guideline for the situation we had earlier where one planet is in the exaltation of one and the other is in the fall.
Get a little louder?
Yeah, like a planet, one planet, like we had the example of Sun in Cancer and Jupiter in Libra.
Yeah.
Where there's an exaltation.
Oh, yes. Thank you for reminding me. I was going to comment on that. I have seen places where they talk about, say that a planet cannot be received by a planet that's in a sign of its stability. I've also seen people who ignore it completely. From a theoretical point of view, it makes sense to me to ignore it, because it's not the condition of the ruler it's not the condition of the planet that's important, it's the condition of the ruler. And the Jupiter in Libra was an okay condition. But it probably does create a problem because the sun has to do something for which it is extraordinarily unfitting. But I don't think it vitiates the reception. It's just a slight impediment at most. But some people do claim that it vitiates the reception completely. That's a variation of the tradition. I go with the dozen school. Yes?
What about when you have, let's say you have, Taurus in the first, Venus is in the first, there's another planet in the first, but they're not in the formal aspect.
Being in the same sign is sufficient.
Is sufficient.
Yes. Being in the sign of a dignified ruler delivers the goods.
Okay.
Yeah. Co-presence is all you require. That's called. Okay then, thank you very much.